Welcome back to the Group Practice Accelerator podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falash, and the Group Practice Accelerator podcast is on the air. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me again today because I've got a guest here with me, one who you all love to hear from. And I know this because I've got the metrics and analytics to prove it. And he's got great knowledge and a great opportunity that he's going to share with you here in a few minutes, or we're going to share. But before I introduce him, I want to build a little foundation for today's conversation. So as you all know by now, if you're on LinkedIn, you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or you see really any of our marketing, Polaris is going to be holding its next chapter in its Masterclass series on doctor development called the Leadership Advantage. And that's going to be January 15th and 16th in Charlotte. So this is really a perfect opportunity for owners and associates looking to hit and then exceed even $1 million a year in production. And we know you can get there. And we want to hone those leadership skills necessary and the operational nuances necessary to carry out what we know is very doable in terms of the benchmarks and sustainable practice growth that we know you want to achieve. Again, it can be within your four walls, your practices, your organization. And that type of content goes hand in hand with really practical takeaways to scale effectively and efficiently. So we're not just chatting about theory here. And it's virtually impossible to experience that type of growth without the proper standardization, protocols, and processes in place from both a clinical perspective, but also, and I'm yelling this in all caps, from how we are managing those now very effective clinical and operational improvements, right? Because if we don't manage them right, there'll be zero sustainability, zero growth long term. So now that you know what we're going to be talking about in today's episode, I'd like to reintroduce today's guest and my friend, Cary Smith, co-founder and CEO of Dundesk. Cary has been on our show a couple of times, as you know, and our listeners have told us that they really find a lot of value in what Cary delivers, and we're grateful that he's here. And that's why we've invited him to speak at our January Masterclass in the midst of other powerful sessions around doctor development, retention, and operational streamlining. So you're going to want to come see him in person at the event, too. Cary, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Jamie, for having me. Yeah.
Always good to see you. Let's jump right into it like we always do. Well, so I want to talk about your session during the January Masterclass because you're going to be breaking up the middle of the day when Dr. Vivek Solanki is going to be presenting. And as you know, he's a Polaris clinical coach and has a group practice of his own, but you're bringing a little bit different spin to the day from an operational perspective. So I want to start by A, saying thank you. We appreciate it. We're so excited that you're going to join us and that you'll be there. And B, let's define what that's going to look like without giving away the farm because we want people to come to the event, of course. So maybe you could start with a little overview and then I'm going to nitpick you with 100 or so questions. How's that
Okay,
sound?
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. So, when in our previous conversations, we've talked a lot about operational related concerns and whatnot. And so the lens I look at this stuff from my background is in clinical risk management. So it's the compliance, it's how we set up our practice, how do we set up our routines and our business to direct ourselves in our workflows and processes to get us where we want to go. So just to reframe our definition of compliance isn't OSHA, HIPAA, infection control, radiation, like those sorts of things. It includes that. But if you look at a higher level story and say, what is compliance? Well, compliance is everything we do day to day to help our business achieve a goal, to move in a certain direction. And if we are not top to bottom in our organization doing the things we need to do to move our organization to the goal we want to obtain, then we are out of compliance in those regards. So some people would say, compliance are these rules we have to pay attention to. And I'm like, nah, well, kind of, yeah, we do have to pay attention to the rules. But the reality is that's part of dentistry. It's part of our group practice and how we move forward in time. But if you start thinking as a leader and as a manager of organizations, if we're going to be in compliance, we are going to do everything we can to pull every single lever to be perfect in how we deliver our processes, but also that those processes are organized around this future state we want to achieve for ourselves. So in the conference we're having in January in Charlotte, like the whole word salad in that group in that thing is around getting you to that direction, right? And there's different lenses. My lens typically is error avoidance and process, because if we're creating error for ourselves and we're taking steps back, or we're not optimized in some regards, then we're certainly not going to be going the direction we want to go. We typically sometimes go backwards in dealing with some of these issues. So the lunch meeting I'm doing for the conversation is going to be focused on repeatable processes and how do we operationalize those things so they survive a couple of things. They survive time, which is the degradation and drift of our disciplines, right? We want to avoid that. And the other one is turnover. Like, how do we set up our systems to endure the constant churn that we have, that we'll always have as business owners? And so that hour or 45 minutes, whatever we're going to get within that space is like, how do we set this up from a leadership imperative perspective? And that's like maybe 5 minutes, because all leaders want that in their business, right? They want to be able to survive turnover and time and the degradation of discipline. So then it's going to be like, well, then what do we do next? Like, what are the steps to build the proper workflows that lead us down the path of success? So that's my presentation for this meeting.
Absolutely, and that's a wonderful overview, and I wanna ask a couple of specific questions here. When I was looking at the course objectives and we were kinda talking about this and building it, we talked about, like, things that make a process repeatable and predictable, and, if I just think about that quickly, it sounds kind of elementary when I say it, but there's a lot more to it than I think most people realize. It not only, like, why we document, but what we document in terms of workflow, meaning like which ones are you current in your processes? Are you effective? And how do you even know? So with that, can you touch on a little bit some things that make a process repeatable and predictable? Because I feel like that's a foundational piece.
You said the word. The word is effective.
Yeah.
And does the process yield the result we want to achieve? And if you are, everyone's got workflows. Either they've been trained, or they've been learned, or they've been inherited. Like, you hire people from some other dental practice and they're using what they learned over there in your business because you didn't have the time and resources to train them the way you wanted it to get done.
Mhm.
So when we talk about effectiveness, there's really, I kind of see these two story arcs. I see a high level story arc of like, do we even know what our workflows are? And if we do know those workflows, have they been judged relative to the output we want to get from those workflows? That's the high level. And then the lower level is like, how do we train our people to understand not only what those workflows are, but what it all means?
Yeah, why?
Because
Like what's the point?
yeah, you could. So an example, just a wild example that I happened last week's is fresh in my pea brain, is this young lady. We went to the sterilization area, and I said, "What's this closet here?" And she goes, "Oh, that's where some machinery is." And I opened the door, and we looked in there, and it was the vacuum pump and the compressor. And I said, "Okay, well, how does this thing?" I didn't ask him what it was. I asked him, "How does this thing work?"
Mhm.
And they just don't know. They press the button on the wall and it all turns on, until the day they press the button and it doesn't, because they didn't pay attention to the things that really drive it. And I point that out as an example because individuals that work in our practices, we assume a lot. We assume they have the right intellect, they have the right engagement and interest in everything they do in the practice, when in reality, sometimes they're just showing up, clocking in, and catching a check and leaving. And if they're not engaged in the work that they're doing, then that is driving some amount of latent risk into your practice. And then at scale, when you have 20, 30, 40 locations, you have risk all over the place. And you don't realize it until something breaks and then you're calling me. That's usually how I learn about these things, is things get broken and then you're like, okay, I need help. So the two layers is going to be that the top is like, do we really have these defined things? And I've got all the workflows defined. And I'll give you the templates for all the workflows at the meeting. That's our That's our bait, right? We'll put that bait in
Yeah.
the water. Come to the meeting. I'll give you all the workflows. But the reality is you got to take that back and sit with your leadership team and organize these things around like this is how we do business, right? This is how we want to operate. And by the way, none of this is really magical or mind bending in and of itself because dentistry is dentistry. It's only done so many ways. Like unless you're like in sedation or a specialty, it's pretty much dentistry 101 across the board. But the hardest part is going to be how. How do we drive these things into our business that are repetitive so that and predictable so we know this is the result we're going to get? So when to answer your question, I think there's like effectiveness is the linchpin. And that's why we built Dundesk. I mean, I'm not a plug on Dundesk, but it's like, we talk about effectiveness all the time because if the employees are accurate and effective, then they are getting what they need to do out into the world. And you can get repetitive results from those employees, and that all sums up to yield a repetitive product and a known outcome for everything that you do.
Yeah, Cary, you should plug Dundesk, and I will, even if you don't want to on this show, because it's a very necessary thing in my mind and in the mind of many, many others. This is something that if you don't implement it, your practice may very well suffer. So, and that's part of the great value that you bring, and that's why we're so excited to have you at this January event.
Yeah, timing is going to be perfect because come January we'll have our new product. We're redesigning Dundesk to be
Yeah.
a much more easier solution, and in an instant you'll be able to see where you're falling behind. Like in an instant, it is
Really?
awesome. Yes.
I need to know more about this.
Yeah, well, well, in 2 clicks, you'll know the employee that is falling behind, like, across your organization and be able to rank data. It's gonna be really cool, but then the neat thing is if someone's falling behind, then you can give them the tools they need to catch back up. You're not spending time chasing spreadsheets and looking for the Google Doc or the thing in the Google Drive or the binder that's in sterilization that still has a shrink wrap on it probably. You're gonna pull down the individual's actions and you'll see that they are not being effective. You'll also see who is being effective so you can reward them or disproportionately or reward people for being more effective because a lot of this is knowing what to do, but it's also like this discretionary effort that people you want to draw out of them. And if they're paying attention and you're paying attention and they're giving you discretionary effort, a lot of risk can be caught before it manifests into a financial loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the risk, we could talk hours on the risk management aspect of this, but what I want to focus on here is that you also provide the education to establish a foundation of knowledge or maybe corrective in some instances because my guess is that you come across a lot of practices and a lot of groups where they're just relying on their native knowledge, like what they've learned along the way. And hey, this works. And what do you do when you have a doctor or maybe an ops person in front of you that says, well, this is the way we've always done it, and we know it's getting done? Do you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you
You
don't. And
don't.
that's why we built this software is
Yeah.
you have this thing where it's like, well, we don't really have the systems to really create these ongoing disciplines, and that's why we built the software. And of course, our training courses are in there, but our training courses only satisfy a portion of what you need to know and operationalize as a business. So then it you can just stick all your stuff in there and then see if people are engaging with it and if they're being active in their workflows and how things come together. So it's going to be a perfect time for January because we'll have the whole new program up and out, and then we can talk about what that really means for the content you guys are producing at Polaris, and also the needs of the customers that are there at the meeting.
Yeah, because we're talking about implementing new processes or modified processes. Like you've got to have a way to lock it in.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Well, if it doesn't exist, right? I mean, it could be really. That's the thing is like a lot of times people go to these meetings and I've been there. I mean, I've seen them. Like, they'll have this expensive binder. They spent $50,000. They flew their team out to some luxurious location. They learned a bunch of good material, but 1 year later, they're not using any of it anymore. And and it just ends up being like, just okay. Well, why did we go in the first place? And the result. the designation of the intention of why we went was not preserved in the processes we develop in our business.
Well, and that's one thing that you have in common with Polaris or Dundesk has in common with Polaris. Like this isn't a one and done, let's get some theory in a binder and send you along your merry way. We're going to help you implement it. We're going to be there to follow through and make sure that this works for you, that it is sustainable.
People need this
Yeah.
because if you had the time and the clarity to do it, you would already be doing it.
Right.
And yeah, as a business owner, look, I wake up sometimes and I'm just like, wait a minute, what? And I'll start paying attention to something and I'll go down the rabbit hole.
Mm.
And it's like, wow, I can figure all this out on my own. I can figure all this out on my own, but I don't have the time. It isn't a priority for me. And sometimes I need help, right? I just need someone to
Everybody does.
intervene. Yeah. Yeah. And it's wild. Once you do that, once you invest in the help, the reward in my opinion, like going home happy with everything done, that's my reward is I can go home and go fishing or be with the dogs or whatever versus coming home and worrying about things, right? So I think that's why I'm like for this event, I'm especially happy because there's a nice pairing of clinical, there's a nice pairing of know-how because you guys have been down the road a lot with this conversation. But then there's this new thing with Dundesk it's singular in the world. Nothing like it's going exists for what we're trying to accomplish, and it pairs exactly up with where you guys want to take people. So I'm excited to go to Charlotte. It's always a good time, and we'd love to see everybody there.
And that all ties beautifully together with a recent podcast I did with a group practice owner. And we were talking about like the hustle, 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 people working, 18, 20 plus hours a day. And sometimes they seem proud of that. And like, my heart always goes out to them thinking like, why? Where is the harmony? Where is the balance? And I think most people deep down really want that balance. And sometimes they just don't know that there are tools and processes that can really help them get that balance that they're looking for. Yeah, you can grow your group. Yeah, you can be successful. And if you have the right tools and experts to help you do that, you can also shut it off at the end of the day when everything is done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I just plugged in this extra hard drive that I had for some reason. I was like, what is this? And I plugged it in. It's a bunch of pictures of my kids when they were like 2 and 3 years old, right? Little.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where did that time go?
Oh,
Like, 'cause I own 3 businesses and it's easy to work as many hours as you want or you need to, and it's good in sprints. I like working really hard and spending lots of hours in sprints, but the reality is that I don't like this term work-life balance. I really enjoy the term life balance, where we create a business that enables us a life to live. I don't wanna get down to where I'm in retirement and I can't walk and move around because I've busted my butt for so long working, and I work in a profession that's not as, degenerative physically as dentistry, right? Just
right.
the
Right. Right.
ergonomic positions and all that. So I would highly encourage if you're young-ish and you want to endure and have, mental freedom, really, like, reframe the purpose of ownership to say, wow, you know what? I can build a business that allows me to live the dream or this entrepreneurial dream, which includes a lot of freedom. Usually, when you talk about, hey, I want to be a business owner, what is that? Why would you want to be a business owner? Well, I'll be my own boss, do my own thing. Well, then you don't get to do your own thing because you have 17 jobs and half a paycheck because you're responsible for so many things. And plus, you didn't get the training on workflow design, talent practices, financial leadership, because, for a variety of reasons, you end up taking this stuff home with you. And I mean, I'll be in a meeting and I'll say, hey, I'll do a little survey and how many of y'all take work home with you? And invariably, almost every owner says they do. So I think this is, if you're interested in that sort of outcome, business objectives are important, but also looking at like how do you endure and how do you stay effective as a leader through time versus these ups and downs of, this emotional tug of war with how much time do I spend with my work versus how much time do I spend with my kids or my dogs or whatever, my hobbies. And so really thinking, okay, if I'd go back in time and design this thing perfect where I can live this life I want to live, what would that be? And that's what this meeting's about, like really putting together these disciplines so less of it comes home with you, more of the reward goes home with you, right?
Exactly, and that's whether you're looking to build this massive legacy that, you wanna live out and continue to stay in the chair a bit, or maybe you're building it to sell, which a lot of docs wanna do, and they're bringing on associates as anchor doctors. They're building out the new locations, adding de novos, adding acquisitions. They're bringing in associates that are gonna be these anchor doctors as they transition from clinician to CEO, making that move. You've gotta have all these processes and workflows in place. So, that's why I think it's perfect that you're gonna be joining us, and, before we get too off track, I wanna ask about some of those workflows. Like, which ones do you find, and I know you probably know these off the top of your head, which ones require documentation or which ones can people just rely on? Yeah, here's how we do it. We do it this way, and this is native. Or are there none like that?
I mean, there's going to be a few. But I think from a documentation angle, it's, you document, hey, there's a standard we want to meet. And then how do we meet the standard? And then who does the work? Like who's going to be doing
Yeah.
these things? And then what do they need to know to make sure that as they do it, they're effective? Right. And that feeds back onto the top part is like, okay, what is this workflow intended to output? Right. So from a documentation angle, this is probably the hardest part because and if you have discipline through time, that means you have a good training program that teaches people the disciplines you want them to have. But when they leave, the next people up have a software they can rely on to where all this knowledge base lives. And then when they have the degradation, if your documentation is like your performance managing them against these standards, then you could say, okay, here's what our standards are. You're not meeting those standards. Now, here's where we have to go to get you back up to speed. And that's this whole cycle of what it's not human resources. I would say it's more talent practices. Like, how do we diagnose talent deficiencies? How do we develop them? How do we put development plans in place like this cycle? That's a workflow in and of itself that definitely needs lots of documentation. So it's not so much like what needs documentation and what doesn't is do you have time to make the documentation and then do you have time to evaluate your business against your standards to validate the documentation or your processes are in a good spot? And no one has time for that because no one does it.
Say, do you know anyone that has time for this?
Yeah. I
'Cause
mean,
I don't.
well, I mean, like you could look at a really easy example is something like discount tires. Like every time I go to discount tires, I get pretty much the same experience, which I would say is an 8 or 9 out of 10.
Yeah,
Like the guys, they're usually young men, are very well trained,
yeah.
and they know they do a ton of business over there. And that's because executive leadership made that decision. You have other businesses where you walk in and you can't find anyone like, I was in Walmart, regrettably, the other day, and I went in Walmart and, nothing against Walmart, but there's like, well, first of all, if you can't find what you're looking for on your own in a Walmart, you've got some serious problems. But
Yeah. You're also
there
out.
there's just the only person I know that's gonna be there is the guy who's at the security at the door, right? I know he's gonna be there for sure, but they just have, lots of turnover and they have very few employees relative to their space, so they have to have a really, really good training program to bring those people up as they come in. But it's an executive leadership decision to not have, like, high touch service. It's basically people oriented at the front to just check you out and take your money. And if you're stealing stuff in the back, they don't really care because it's all made in China or whatever. I don't know. It's all cheap stuff. So,
How do you really feel?
well, yeah, I mean, you just like,
Yeah.
but you go into a business and you experience things, and those are leadership decisions. The other example I can give, if you want to cut out the Walmart piece for preservation of the integrity of this podcast, is you go to Waffle House. right?
Mhm.
So you go to Waffle House, and when do you go to Waffle House? You go to
Yeah,
Waffle House at like 2 in the morning, right?
you absolutely do.
Because it's like the only thing open that's, okay, but during the day, there's no line at Waffle House, there's a line at Starbucks, there's a line at, the coffee shop, whatever, and there's lots of competition, Cracker Barrel and all that, so when all those are closed, you're adversely selected, and it's like, why can't Waffle House be really, really amazing breakfast, full lunch, dinner, like the whole thing? Because they can't, because leadership made the decision that that's the life they're gonna live.
Mhm.
So, when you talk about documentation, well, put the documentation aside. It really starts with leadership imperative and what kind of business do we want to build? And then
Mhm.
how does that present itself to the world? And by the way, how does it present itself to our people? So you bring your people close to you. So again, they understand where they live, they understand what they need to do. And then that allows them to take ownership of their jobs and give you that discretionary effort and ensure that their workflows are done to the highest quality possible.
Yeah, and you just said some words that are some of my favorites. What kind of business
Waffle House?
at 2 AM? Yes, because I've never done that before. I don't know what you're talking about. What kind of business do you want to build? This is what you have to
Yeah.
sit and ask yourself, and that's what this event is all about. Do you wanna stay where
Yep.
you Do you wanna stay where you are? Cool. Maybe this isn't for you. But if you're looking to build your business, build it within your organization, develop your associates, develop yourself into the leader that you know you can be, and learn how to make it repeatable. Implement this all into your business in a really impactful way. Then yeah, you should join us for sure.
Well, let me just throw a number at you. I mean,
Yeah,
I think most people would agree they want a better business. They always want to learn new things and try
sure.
to implement where they can. So, okay, so there's 47 workflows in dentistry, right? I'm going to give up the lunch a little bit here, but there's 47 workflows. And, most of the time, as an owner, you would be super happy with somebody executing perfectly 9 times out of 10,
Mhm.
right? Answering the phone 90% of the time, they're crushing it. Like, people would die for that. If you have 47 workflows and you try to move those something through those processes and at a 90% effectiveness, for each one of the workflows, you only end up with 62% effectiveness as a business. Because in dentistry, you have a flow of events, right? You have a chain of events that
Yeah.
occur. Check-in, insurance, pre-med, do the exam, hygiene exam, whatever. If any of that gets messed up in that workflow, it impacts the next part of the flow. So if you had 1,000 items and you ran 1,000 items through a 47-step process and each step was only 90% effective, then you end up with 62% yield of that workflow.
Mm,
And this is where you get one-star Yelp reviews from, is
yeah.
that it wasn't leadership's decision, it was someone's execution within that workflow. But I just want to throw that number out there because you think, wow, someone's being 90% effective. That really sounds like a really good number. But in reality, it means you're 10% ineffective and it ripples down the chain, which yields ineffectiveness across the board, which impacts the people that work for you, but also impacts, the people that are paying your bills, which is the patients.
Well, yeah, and it becomes completely unacceptable at that at a much higher threshold than 62%. In fact, my son and I always comment on customer service when we're out and about together. And for those who don't know, he's almost 20, but it's how you're treated and it matters.
Yeah.
62%, you'd have no patience left.
Yeah.
What if you're a surgeon? Hey, I got a 62% success rate. What if you're a pilot? Think about that.
Yeah, yeah, that's no, I don't
The
no,
time I'm doing a
I'm
good job.
yeah, I'm driving to Charlotte now. I'm not gonna fly, thanks a
Sorry to
bunch.
plant that seed.
But I mean, but it's a miracle anything gets done. I mean, if you
Yeah,
think
you're
about it in
right.
that way, it's a miracle. And, but what's wild about it, what's very promising about it, is that this is as a leader, you can decide to actively influence all of these workflows. But you don't. So you end up building latent risk into your practice,
Yeah.
and that's why you take things home with you. That's why you worry because your body knows that there's things happening that need to get done that you're not doing, and you carry that. I call it the bear in the woods, right? So you know there's a bear. You don't know where the bear is, but it's out there, and you just worry about it, right? And it's there's a bunch of psychology that goes along with all that, but but the neat thing is you can fix it, and you can start to empower your business to again get back to that part where you're like, hey, what happened to this entrepreneurial reward I was told all about back in dental school? Well, cool. You can build this right now, and you
Mm.
can go live the life you want to live through your business.
Yeah, exactly. And do what you dreamed of doing and not feel overwhelmed by it at the end of the day. And let's not sugarcoat it. There are going to be days. Everybody has stressful days.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
there are ways to sort of insulate against a lot of that stress. So I'm really excited that you're going to be talking us through that. And I'm sure that we could have you there for hours and talk on this topic because I know you and I have a couple of times on this show. But like, why document things? Let's talk about the anatomy of what that repeatable process looks like, and then really putting it into practice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm
Let's
excited.
let's let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, I'm really excited that you're going to join us. Can't wait for that January event, January 15th and 16th in Charlotte. And I'm going to link to that in the show notes. And I'm also going to link to Dundesk because if you aren't familiar, I don't know how you couldn't be. Carrie's been on the show a couple times and it's been super popular episodes. Please go check out Dundesk. It's something that I feel and a lot of us feel that you should not be living without. So please check out Cary. And Cary, thank you for sharing your guidance, your knowledge with us today. And I really look forward to seeing you in January.
No, I appreciate you, Jamie. You're kicking butt. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as always, if you'd like to schedule some time to learn about any of Polaris Expert Advisory Services, or there's a topic that we haven't covered that you'd like to hear about, you can just send us an email to info@polarishealthcarepartners.com, or you can always reach us by visiting the website. Just go up to that Contact Us button at polarishealthcarepartners.com, and we'll get right back to you. So thanks so much for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague or friend and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.